Hello and welcome to my latest video, this one on Kantian Deontology. As before, this is for AQA Philosophy 7171 and 7172, and as always this is a revision video, not a comprehensive overview of what Kantian Deontology involves. Okay, so as always let's begin, and the first thing to say is obviously when we're approached with something like Kantian Deontology, it can initially seem quite confusing. Just the term Kantian Deontology is likely to sort of send shivers down our spine. However, it's not that difficult to understand, and the general principle is that basically in order to act morally, people should act out of duty. Now, when we're talking about acting out of duty, the first thing I'm going to explain is something Kant calls the goodwill. According to Kant, basically goodwill is the sense of acting out of duty. In other words, that you have a kind of responsibility to do something. The easiest way to understand this is basically to think about something that you do which you might not necessarily enjoy doing. For example, housework. If you only did jobs around the house because you were paid, then according to Kant, that would be done out of self-interest, and as a consequence of that has no moral worth whatsoever. However, if you were to do the housework because you feel that it's your duty and responsibility, then according to Kant, that is a morally worthwhile pursuit. Okay, so as we've already mentioned, or as I've already mentioned, when we talk about Kant, we use the term deontology. What we're talking about in terms of deontology is a way of judging actions according to a moral code or law. In the case of Kant, he believes that this is something called the categorical imperative. Now, at this point, it's worth remembering that this is different from utilitarians, who basically believe that their moral actions should be judged on the consequences of those actions. As before and in the other videos, you'll recall if you've watched the utilitarianism one that there are some key phrases that you have to learn, and Kantian deontology is no different. So one of the things that you will have to learn is this little quote: act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law without contradiction. Seems a little bit confusing, but actually if you unpack it, it's not necessarily that difficult to follow. Basically, according to Kant, there are two kinds of maxims. One is called the hypothetical imperative, and the second is categorical imperatives. Hypothetical imperatives are often personal and goal-orientated and contain an if in the sentence. So, just as an example, if I want to lose weight, I should eat less and join a gym. Now, the first thing to say is these hypothetical imperatives are clearly not universally applicable. They seem to just be directed towards the individual, whereas categorical imperatives are universal. So what do I mean by that? Well, the first thing to say is categorical imperatives do not contain an if, and secondly, they express something that you would like to apply universally. So, for example, walking around my local town, I see a lot of litter being thrown down, so I would like it to be universally applicable that people just don't sort of throw their litter out into the streets. I'd also like it to be universally the case that people don't steal. So you can see those instances of things that we may wish to apply universally. The problem is, though, that it's not that easy, and Kant recognises this. So in order to ensure that universal maxims actually work, Kant subjects them to a series of tests. Now, the first one is something called contradiction in conception. That basically means that a universal law cannot contradict itself. For example, if we imagined a universal law that said it's okay to steal other people's stuff, this would imply that personal property exists, that you could actually steal someone else's stuff. However, if we say that it's universally okay to steal, then the implication must be that personal property doesn't actually exist. I can't claim that that car is mine if I'm quite happy to steal someone else's car and understand that someone might steal my car. It doesn't make any sense to kind of suggest that it's mine, knowing that there's basically a free-for-all going on in terms of theft. So that's a contradiction in conception. Okay, the second is a contradiction in will. In this example, Kant asks whether we can rationally will a maxim. The best way to describe that is to imagine one of those TV programs where people live in the middle of nowhere and claim to be self-sufficient. They may also want to will other people to do the same. That basically we're going to be living in the middle of nowhere, not relying on anyone else at all. But is that really possible? Surely at some point they will need someone's assistance, and at some time. For Kant, that would result in an imperfect duty, basically a duty that can't be followed. Okay, the next quote that you're going to have to learn is something to do with the humanity formula, which is act in such a way that you always treat humanity never simply as a means, but always at the same time as an end. Okay, so what does Kant mean by this? Well, in the humanity formula, Kant gives a second formulation of the categorical imperative. Here he urges people not to be used as a means to an end. In other words, not to exploit someone else. The reason why? Well, Kant believes that in doing so, that denies their right to exercise rationality. Again, you can see really good examples of that in your average soap opera, where, for example, someone gets married because they believe that the other person is in love with them, but that person is actually just exploiting them because they happen to be a multimillionaire. So that would be a case of treating someone as a means to an end. You're simply sort of getting married to them in order to take financial advantage of them. Okay, so that's basically a summary of Kant's deontology. There are, however, some problems. So as we go through these, the first problem is that we could define maxims to exclude or include certain groups. So, for example, we could wish that it's universal that people don't kill one another, but as the Nazis did, we could say that actually we're going to exclude certain groups from that, and we might sort of say that they are subhuman or whatever. So you can see that it can be used in a quite frightening way. It also ignores the consequences of an action. It's okay to say that it isn't all right to steal and make that universally applicable. However, what if people starve to death because they weren't provided with food that you had to steal? Not everything we do is also done out of duty. So, for example, Kant would say that if you're going to visit someone out in hospital, you can only do so if it's done out of duty, and that it's not necessarily have any moral worth if you do so because you happen to like that person. That seems to be kind of very much out of kilter with the way humans behave. The last problem is that perfect duties might clash. So we can think of some perfect duties where we would like them to be universal, for example, for people to keep their promises and for people not to steal. However, those perfect duties might clash. For example, if we promise to provide a starving person with food, but having to steal it in order to do so. Okay, so I hope that this brief overview has been helpful, and my next video is going to be on Aristotelian virtue ethics.